Hello, I'm Thalia Medenwaldt. I'm introducing my dad, Jay Medenwaldt. He's the director of Apologetics Awareness, and he's here to talk with you about psychology and apologetics. Thank you.
Thank you, Thalia. Obviously, my daughter, and I try to make the apologetics I do a family affair and incorporate my knowledge and background of psychology into what I do in ministry, because the importance of a family and having families do things together and building relationships is really important. And so that relates, because as I talk on psychology and apologetics, when I say psychology, what comes to your mind immediately? Right. Freud, laying on a couch. So if I say psychology and apologetics, you probably want to kick back, put your feet up, and talk about these long-lost memories of your childhood and how that led you to or from God, right? Well, no, that's not quite what I'm going to talk about, because psychology is a much broader subject than that. It's a scientific discipline where we study human thoughts, emotions, and behaviors in any way, shape, and form. And one of the talks I give often that relates psychology and apologetics is on the science of persuasion. So how can we persuade and influence people more effectively? Well, I must confess, I failed Psychology of Persuasion 101 today by showing up without shaving, not dressing up, and kind of setting myself apart because of how we immediately make snap judgments about people. It just happens automatically. To my defense, if you want to take that, I wasn't planning on speaking today. It was a last-minute thing, but I'm happy to do it because I love this subject so much. But what am I going to talk about today? Well, one of the kind of foundations of psychology, so how do we think? What are the things that goes into our mind when we think? And so just a part of that is going to be on overcoming and avoiding cognitive biases and errors. So little things, shortcuts that our minds make that helps us function in the world day to day, but can sometimes lead us to false conclusions. That's what I'm going to be talking about today. And so if you're familiar at all with apologetics, you probably hear a lot about fallacies. So if someone says something that doesn't make sense, so one time one of my kids made the bold profession that she knew how old another girl was. I said, "Oh, how old is she?" She said 7. It's like, "Wow, you got it right. How'd you know that?" "Well, she has 7 letters in her name." That's a non sequitur, right? She got the right answer just by chance, okay? But it doesn't really make sense. That's a logical fallacy. It's a non sequitur. Other ones people you often hear of probably ad hominem, right? So attacking the person or their character rather than the argument. So we're more familiar with logical fallacies, but closely intertwined with logical fallacies are these cognitive biases or heuristics. And when I ask people, can you name any of these, there's usually silence, and then someone will say confirmation bias, and then it's a long silence until I say, okay, that's the one everyone almost always gets. But I've got here a list of all kinds of different things that affect the way we reach decisions, whether they're biases or heuristics or things that just affect our mental state of mind. And I know you can't read this. The point isn't for you necessarily to read this, and if you want, I can send this to you later, but the point is to show all these different things, many of which are unconscious, that affect the way we think and the way that we reach decisions, how we talk to people, what we believe, why we believe it, and so on. And so today what we're going to do is I'm going to go through a few things, play some mind games with you. I am making the bold profession right now that I'm going to trick your mind, okay, right from the start. And I know I will, because it happens all the time. All right, but does that mean your mind is unreliable? And that's where we're going to get into tying this together with apologetics. All right, so first one, we're going to do an activity. Okay, so I'm going to put up on the screen, hopefully you can all read it. As soon as it comes up, everyone just read it together out loud. Does that make sense? All right, go ahead. All right, I heard one sarcastic by, but everyone else, ABC, okay? We're going to do the same thing again for the next slide. All right? Okay, so you've all got it, right? You're on to me. So the B and the 13, and there was a formatting issue. It was a little better. But the context, what the B/13 was surrounded by, affected how we perceive that, especially the first time when it was new and novel. We weren't expecting it. Okay, but I got a couple more things on context, right? So this one, just a little optical illusion. We look at it, oh wow, the lady's floating. Someone must have photoshopped it. Oh wait, no. You can see it's a shadow of a flag that happens to line up with the platform she's standing on, okay? So nothing mind-blowing yet, but we get to some other things like this. We see the monsters. Which monster is bigger? Okay. I'll tell you, the monsters are the same size, but we look at it, we can't see them as the same size. All right, we can even look, if I hold the clicker up here, it's about half a body length here and here. Okay, this next one, again, now you're on to me, you're gonna know my trick. I've got A and B, the squares A and B, I don't know if you can see them. A and B. Which one's darker? A looks darker, right? But is it darker? If we take away the context, you just take it away, they're the same color. I can go back and do it again, and even when you know they're different colors, they look different. All right, this next one, this is called the McGurk effect. So I'm not sure how it's going to work because the screen's kind of small, but we can test it out and see. It might be helpful if it doesn't work, maybe to move closer, but we'll give it a try here. So watch the screen, listen, and tell me, when he's done, tell me what he said.
Ba, 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 ba.
Any volunteers? What did you hear in the back? Okay. Anyone else? You heard ga? Ga. Anyone else? Anything else? Ga. Did anyone hear a D sound? All right, we'll try again, see if it works. We'll do it one more time.
Ba, 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 ba.
Okay, you heard da da. All right, so this is actually, so la la. So what we're getting here is a mix between two sensory systems, our eyes and our ears. So now we're going to listen one more time, but don't look. Close your eyes or look away.
Ba, 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 ba.
Now what did you hear? Ba ba. So everyone got it. So what's happening, some clever psychologists took a video clip of someone saying da da. So D is in dog. That's the video making the D sound, but then they replaced it with the audio of ba ba, like a sheep, ba ba, right? But because we're so visually oriented, even when we know what's going on, we often hear the D sound because that's what we're seeing, or we hear a mix. So that's where some of you might have heard an L or a G sound. So now that you know what's going on, this is really a B sound. B as in boy. All right, watch again and see. Pay close attention. So watching the video, watch and see what you hear.
Ba, 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 ba.
How many people, just show of hands, even though you knew what was going on, did not hear a B sound? Okay? So pretty much everyone, right? It's that powerful. So what's going on? Context shapes our perception. So often we think we perceive something, there's no interpretation, it's just raw facts, raw perception cannot be tricked or manipulated. But that's not really the case. Just our perception, based on the context, things around it, right, can be influenced. And so how does that matter in apologetics or in evangelism or religious belief? Well, now, if we think and expand, what's the context? Our worldview, the culture we live in, our friends, who we hang out with, okay? What we do for work or where we work or the people at our work. Okay? All these things are the context that surrounds our life that kind of affects the way that we view things. And so when you meet someone on the street and you ask them what they think about Jesus, just asking the question, like, who is Jesus? The context and what they grew up with may be a completely foreign concept to them, or especially if we go something a little more abstract like the concept of God. I've had people ask, what do you mean by God? I've heard other people ask it, what do you mean by God? If we look at the different religions, different cultures growing up, like there's these massively different views of God. And so we want to come in and say, well, God exists because of X, Y, and Z. Well, what does that mean? A lot of times people can't even understand the questions, and at least in the way that you're meaning them to because of their context. So the point here is the importance of when we think about God, when we talk to others about God, when we're trying to train up our children or grandchildren or witness to a neighbor, sometimes we have to take a step back and make sure we're on the same page, that we're using both the words in the same way and we have the same and similar understanding of them before we move forward, which can sometimes be hard when you're talking the same language, but you kind of seem to be talking past each other. It might be more of a contextual issue. You have different ideas about what certain things might mean. All right, we're going to do another activity. So for this one, take out your phone or a notebook or something that you can write down. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to flash some words up here. I'm going to read them out loud, right? And we'll go through the whole list. And once I'm done with the list, I want you to write them down because your task is going to be to memorize it. So don't write anything down until we're done. Okay, and then when we get done, try and write as many as you can. Does that make sense? All right, here we go. Bed, rest, awake, tired, dream, wake, snooze, blanket, doze, slumber, snore, nap, peace, yawn, drowsy. All right, quick, write as many as you can remember. I'll give you about a minute or so to do this. It's a good way to see some age effects too, especially with such a diverse crowd. All right, a couple more seconds. All right, so our mind works in, so we can see a couple different effects here. Fun one. So the first word on the list, bed. Raise your hand if you got bed. All right, looks like everyone just about. Okay, that's called the primacy effect. So things that come first, they stand out, and so we remember them better. That makes sense, right? What about drowsy? Who got drowsy? Okay, just a few people. So usually when I do this, it's almost as many get drowsy as get bed because now it's what's called the recency effect. So things that just happen, right, they're still in our kind of short-term memory, we remember those better. But then if I ask a question and say something in the middle, like blanket, how many people got blanket? Okay, 3, 4, and one who's done this before, so she doesn't count. Okay, so not as many people usually remember the things in the middle. However, let me ask, how many people got sleep? So one up in the booth. About half of you. Here's the problem though. Sleep wasn't on the list. It's called the critical lure. Okay? So all the words are about sleep. Every one of them, but sleep wasn't on our list. And this is because our minds aren't like iPhones or video recorders. They don't capture everything perfectly. We build these kind of schemas and ideas, like kind of scaffolding in our memories, and then we kind of fill in the gaps. And that's how our minds work. And so when you do something like this, we can manipulate our memories pretty easily. So this is kind of the beginning of what psychologists call false memories. Okay? So now, the question and the importance here is, do false memories affect or strengthen or weaken your faith? So initially, when I have this and I show this and point this out, people are like, oh wow, that's, maybe the disciples did remember wrong and wrote it down wrong. I have to rethink my faith. But I want to tell you, no. It doesn't weaken your faith. It should strengthen it. Because what we get when we study memory, when we look at it scientifically, when we do these sort of tricks, what we find is kind of the limits of this sort of things. How do memories change over time? Or do they change? Or to what extent? And what's the limit? And what we find is oftentimes false memories are more in the details. Oftentimes they go back to something in childhood. A neat experiment done by some memory researchers. People come into the lab, but they had to submit a photo before coming into the experiment from them at Disney World with Mickey Mouse. And so the researchers would Photoshop Mickey Mouse out and put Bugs Bunny in. Well, Bugs Bunny's not a Disney character, right? But when they showed people these pictures of them at Disney with Bugs Bunny, they told these great elaborate stories of all these things they did with Bugs Bunny. Does that mean the whole thing never happened? No, what they had done is they swapped their memory, right, of what happened, what they did with Mickey, with what they did with Bugs Bunny. Still the same story, still the same thing. It's not like there was this new thing that happened that didn't really happen. No, it was just getting fuzzy on the details, and then when they were presented evidence of something they hadn't recalled for 20, 30 years in some cases, yeah, things might change. But what do we see in the Gospels? Right? What do we see with the eyewitness testimony? We see this huge, enormously important event, something completely unexpected. Right? That's not something that you can get someone to remember falsely. Right? If it happened, right, people are going to remember it. If it didn't happen, you can't get someone to believe that happened, especially to have it happen with 500 witnesses or to convince a skeptic who is off killing the people who believe it. And then when was it written down? Well, early creed in 1 Corinthians 15, most historians think that's within 5 years of the resurrection as an oral creed, possibly down to as much as a year or 18 months. So this is way too little time to pass for something like these memory kind of tricks that psychologists like to play, right, to drastically change the story. It's the same story. And so knowing that, knowing how memory works, we can say, yes, we can be very reliably certain that they did not remember that wrong, because it would be, there's no explanation for it within science. Right? You can't get someone to believe something that extreme happened if it didn't really happen. And there's all kinds of issues, as we kind of already alluded to, with hallucinations and different theories. But here we're just focusing on memory. And so as we study memory and learn more about it, I think it gives us greater confidence knowing that what the disciples recorded, or the authors of the New Testament recorded about the resurrection, is accurate and true. All right, let's do some more of these. So this one, we'll see if this works. Hopefully you can all see. This is from the show Brain Games. It's an excerpt. So watch kind of what happens here, and then we'll talk through it.
Tension along with them as the crew gets the final shot of the movie. Try to remember what you see.
There we go. Final shot. Action.
Keep watching. Everything you see is fair game.
Look out the car! Cut!
Okay, that wasn't part of the movie. Did you catch what just happened? I know, it was a lot to take in. But we're going to let you in on a little secret. The actors, director, crew, and police are all in on it. Everyone, in fact, except our spectators. And former Las Vegas Police Sergeant Chris Curtis is here to test your memory. He's going to ask you and our other witnesses 3 questions about what you just saw. Ready?
What color was the car that got hit?
Think back and try to be accurate. Got your answer?
Did you say blue? Good, that's correct. Next question. How fast do you think the car was going when it bumped into the other car?
What do you think? Was the red car going 10, 15, 20, 30, or 40 miles an hour? Got your answer? Did you guess around 20 miles an hour? If so, you agree with 80% of people we showed this video to. Before we reveal if you're correct or not, let's see what our spectators have to say.
How fast would you say the car was going when it smashed into the other car?
I'd say 40.
Between 40 and 50.
I'm going about 30 miles an hour.
Definitely 50 miles an hour.
These people think...
Were they way above your estimates? How many people? Yes? Did anyone pick up on why they might think that was? What was that? They were there. They were there? No.
The way they skidded?
No. So more subtle than that. All right? The way the question was asked, yeah. So I'll let him explain it and we'll talk a little more. So here's the explanation.
really high. Is that what you thought, or did you think it was much lower? It turns out the actual speed was 20 miles an hour. Is that what you guessed? So why were our eyewitnesses so much higher? The thing is, only some of our witnesses guessed high. Others were much closer to the real speed.
How fast do you think the car was going when it bumped into the other car?
Probably about 10, 15 miles per hour.
15 miles per hour.
50 miles an hour?
Yeah,
Okay, how can this guy think it's 50
between 40 and 50.
and this guy think it's 15?
15 miles per hour.
After all, they both saw the same crash, but if you've been paying attention, you'd know it's not the crash that matters, it's the question. Listen carefully to Sergeant Curtis.
How fast would you say the car was going when it smashed into the other car? How fast do you think the car was going when it bumped the other car?
Did you catch it?
It's a little change in words. How fast was the car going when it bumped versus smashed into the other car? So again, our memories aren't perfect. And so when someone asks a question in a slightly different way, right, our mind creates this automatic expectation, right? So if we hear the word smashed, our minds create this expectation that it was fast and powerful and like a violent kind of thing. And this happens without us even realizing it. So small little change like that, huge difference in outcomes versus people guessing 15 to 20 miles an hour versus 30 to 50 miles an hour. So that's a huge difference. And so the question here is more now on how do our words affect the way that we first do evangelism. I think maybe the clearest example of this is when someone comes and knocks on your door. Who's known for that? The Latter-day Saints and Jehovah's Witnesses, right? We see them walking through neighborhoods or riding around on their bikes, and so we can spot them. And they knock on our door and they say, can we share the good news about our Lord Jesus Christ with you? Right? So again, we talked about that same language. They don't necessarily mean the same thing. But now let's say you respond. How do you respond? Do you respond by saying, oh, well, I don't want to join a cult? Right? Do you think if you call their religion a cult, do you think they're going to be receptive to hearing what you have to say? Or even if they do, even if they're young and arrogant, they're like, oh, God, they think I'm a cult. I'm going to show them. Do you think they're in a position to reason through any kind of arguments or reasons you might give for Christianity? No, because you've already put them in that mindset, right, of being defensive, of being angry at you. And so they're already kind of have tunnel vision and thinking in a particular way. So that's the obvious application, but can we think of another? Why maybe words might affect the way that affect our Christian life? Might be a good way to say it without giving away the answer. So I'm going to challenge you to think that words affect your own views. And so now you say, okay, well, maybe I won't use the word cult when I'm talking to a Latter-day Saint, but I may use it when I'm sitting around talking with my church friends about the people who came and knocked on my doors. But again, so we use this terminology. How does that lead us to think about these people or about any outgroup, right? Because it's not just Latter-day Saints. It's maybe we think about atheists and we like to tell, quick little anecdotes about atheists and crack jokes and think about them, oh, well, they're just emotional thinkers and they're not thinking rationally or whatever. And we use this language that often doesn't give them the full aspect of humanness, right? So it's almost like we're taking away some of their humanity and we start to view them as lesser as or somehow inferior to us. And so have you ever been in a conversation with someone who thought you were inferior? You think of times when that's happened, it's annoying, right? It's bothersome, it's condescending. It probably wasn't very effective. They probably didn't persuade you of something, except maybe the rare opportunity, maybe in a college class with a professor who, that's just the way he or she is. But typically it doesn't go over so well. And so the way that we use language, even in our personal lives, will sometimes affect the way that we view others. And I think prayer is a good example of this. As we pray, we pray a prayer, forgive us as we forgive others. Right? That simple prayer, right, simple terminology that we use helps us to love others and pray for them and be more forgiving towards others. And it's actually kind of a brilliant application of psychology that we see in the Bible. Maybe not so much as so we could say that it's an argument that Christianity is true because it has this little aspect of human nature that it touched on, but I think it can support kind of a view that as modern psychology studies human nature and how we think and how our minds think, we see little things like that all throughout the Bible. It's like, oh wow, that's pretty amazing that the Bible got that right, or this right. Another example is sex. I give a talk often on sex and apologetic because we hear culture, we get different messages from culture about what our lives are supposed to be like in that area. But again, what does the science show? Well, following the biblical model leads to healthier marriages, better sex life within marriage, lower rates of depression and anxiety, so all of these good benefits. And again, if the Bible wasn't inspired by God, we wouldn't really expect those things to happen. That's kind of a side point. I got off track because it's fun and interesting, and people typically enjoy that. So next one, another exercise, little activity. So I'm going to flash a couple stocks up on the screen. All right. All you have to do is pick 3 of them. Okay. So I'll flash them up there. Choose whichever 3 you like and keep them in your mind. Simple enough? All right. Choose 3. All right, and stop. Got your 3? Everyone's good? Okay, so now, SAR, LEN, or TAN. So these 3, raise your hand if you chose 2 or 3 of them. Okay, so that's almost everyone. Everyone except like 3 people. Okay, so now, Mark, I'm sorry, but this is my speaking fee. So everyone's got to pay Mark, and you can get the fee. All right? So those of you who picked 2 or 3 of those would have been negative versus those who picked only 1 or 0 would be in the positive. How did I do that? Does anyone know? Anyone have a guess? Right. Yeah, these look like words to us, right? So it makes sense. And so when we have nothing to go on, it's simple just to go with what's familiar, what we know. All right, that's often how we do it. And so in a case like this, we can kind of take advantage of our desire to have familiarity, right? And so we know it, we recognize it, but this happens to us throughout all things kind of day to day. So how many of you grew up in a Christian home? Right? Pretty much everyone. I did not, actually, for the most part. But it's pretty normal for people to adopt the same faith as their parents. Right? Because what happens if you want to leave? It's something new, it's scary, it's uncertain. You might be giving up those bonds, right? You might be giving up friendships, but also it's new and it's scary. You don't know what you're getting yourself into. When you stay with the faith of your family, you know what you're getting into. You know what your future is going to be like. It gives us a sense of security, and we like that as humans. It's normal for us to want to do that. Okay, so here's another one, a question. A bat and a ball cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does each one cost? Answer? Go ahead. How much is the difference? So that's the normal answer. Most people say $1 and then 10 cents, but that would be a 90-cent difference. So the actual answer is 5 cents and $1.05. So again, we have this tendency to just go with what's simple, what's familiar, what makes sense. And we look at this automatically and, oh, okay, I've got this. It's easy numbers. It makes sense. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. The total cost is $1.10. It's tricky. It takes thought. But we look at this problem, and it seems simple. And so here's another one. How many animals of each kind did Moses take on the ark? How many? How many animals?
2 of each kind that were unplanned 7.
See, now you're going in too much depth. It's 0. Moses didn't take any on the ark. Noah did. Right? So we go from thinking too quick to thinking a little too deep. Okay? And again, so if I gave you this problem and told you like it's tricky, every one of you could sit down and figure it out, no problem. Okay? This one or either one. But our minds don't often do that. And so when we talk about religion, when we talk about God, when we talk about Jesus, at least within an American culture, do people think they know what they're talking about? In your experience? In my experience, typically, yeah, everyone is an expert on religion. everyone thinks they know about Jesus and the Bible and what the Bible says and doesn't say. I was completely convinced when I was growing up as a non-Christian that, the Bible was just full of contradictions and, everyone knew that, and I don't know why people would believe such silly things, and it just must be if some sort of God exists, he just did that because he wants us to be humble and not such arrogant jerks, because that was the view I had of Christians. I just knew this. Well, where did I learn this? I don't know. I just kind of picked it up from culture. And when I started to think about it rationally and more carefully and through more of a scholarly view and actually reading the Bible, like, oh, wow, that's not quite right. And it's a little disturbing to me that I was so easily influenced by culture. But this happens to us so easily in all these different areas. All right? So we kind of talked familiarity and simplicity. That's our minds like things that are simple and familiar. It's easy for us to work with. We know the outcome. We know what's coming. We're comfortable doing it, something we've done before, so generally speaking, we're good at it. But that doesn't always lead to truth. And that's important. And that's sometimes going to be the difficulty we have when we are talking to people of different cultures or different faiths and trying to witness to them. But even now, with our kids and grandkids, with technology, oftentimes they understand the world so much different than when we grew up and we were disconnected, right? And we couldn't be reached by telephone every second of the day, and we weren't on social media all the time. And so even though it's same culture, same families, sometimes there's that huge disconnect, because what is simple and familiar for your kids or your grandkids or your neighbors or nephews or whatever the age or group might be, right, might be hard and complex for you, and the other way around. And so we need to keep this in mind as we are training up our children or evangelizing and talking to others. This next one, and kind of finishing up here, this is a quote by Bertrand Russell. Does anyone know who he is other than my philosophy geeks over here? So Bertrand Russell was probably one of the most famous atheists of the 1900s. He's got this quote, says, "The whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, and wiser people are so full of doubts." All right? And so he was speaking somewhat anecdotally, but he hit on something that psychologists call the Dunning-Kruger effect. And this is kind of a graph form of it. So very simple to understand this. On the bottom is how competent someone is or how knowledgeable they are. And on this other axis here is someone's confidence in their knowledge. So what we find, what we see is people learn just a little bit about a subject, they think that they're experts. They're very confident in their knowledge. And if this does not sum up our current political climate, I don't know what else does, right? Because everyone's an expert on foreign policy, economics, right, religion, and social issues, and on and on and on, right? Everyone's an expert on it, but I mean, really? I mean, they're pretty complex subjects if we really think about it, and people with, PhDs who have spent years studying these individual subjects sometimes will admit that they don't really know, okay? So how is this important? So remember, again, this may be us, right? And so if this is us, we can recognize it in ourselves and we can say, okay, well, maybe I'm not the expert I thought I was. And so by doing this, because when you're here, you're confident and you know you're right, are you going to listen to others? Probably not, okay? But if we have that intellectual humility, we're going to be more open to listening to others, which does a couple things that are really helpful. For one, it helps us actually listen to other people, which shows that we respect them. It helps build bonds. It helps build friendships. And so if we want to win someone to Christ or persuade them or disciple them, that's going to be a key, is to show them we care simply by listening. But the other thing that's really effective is sometimes other people are actually right, surprising enough to say. Right? So if you think just within Christianity, all the different doctrines that people disagree on. So creation, old earth or young earth, okay? How literal is Genesis? Calvinism or Arminianism or even Molinism or all these other different things, right? Not all of us have all of those right. And so we can learn from each other, but if we're always talking in a way that we think we're the experts, we're not going to find the truth. And so ultimately our goal as Christians should be to know the truth, right? but sometimes we get in our own way of that. And again, this isn't unique to Christians, it's not unique to atheists, it's not unique to Buddhists, it's a general human condition. And so being aware of it can help us both in our own lives and also when we talk to others. All right, so last set here, a couple questions. All right, this first one is, how long after eating sugar does it take for the sugar to make kids hyperactive? Does anyone have an answer? So your answers are 1 minute, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, or 60 minutes. Any guesses? Come on, someone be brave. I know I've messed with your heads a little, but you're all tentative.
30 minutes.
15, 30, so it's actually a trick question. Sugar doesn't actually make kids hyperactive. So this has actually been scientifically tested, where scientists took a bunch of kids, gave half of them sugar, gave half of them the same cake or dessert or whether without sugar, and then put them in a room and let them play together. But then what they did is they told their parents, they told half the parents the kids had sugar, half the parents that the kids did not have sugar, but only half got the right answer. And so then what they did on top of that is they had objective observers watching the kids and writing down everything the kids did. And what they found was essentially parents who thought their kids had sugar rated the kids' behavior as more hyperactive, whereas parents who thought their kids did not have sugar rated the kids as less hyperactive. And it didn't matter if the kids had sugar or didn't have sugar. Again, because this perception biases everything we have. So we think that sugar makes kids hyperactive, we see normal, regular behavior as hyperactive. And so what's really going on here, often when kids get sugar, right, it's at a party, it's at a fun event, it's at Halloween, trick-or-treating, they're already hyperactive. So it's not the candy, the sugar that's making them hyperactive, it's the event or the situation. Or likewise, if we think about it biologically, what happens when we eat food? Our body breaks it down into what? Sugar, right? So if sugar becomes sugar, it's not going to affect us any more than anything else, right? But this is a common thing we hear in culture and we know and we think is true, but when we think about it, when we investigate it carefully and closely, we find, oh, maybe it's not necessarily true after all. A couple more questions and we'll wrap up. How long does it take to fully digest gum? You're probably on to me at this point, right? Just 1 day, okay? It's not 7 years, okay? And think about how many people would have died if gum stayed in our system for 7 years, right? All right, shaving causes hair to grow back thicker, faster, and darker, true or false? We think it's true, but it's actually false, because when we're shaving, when do we start shaving? Usually when we're young. As we age, what happens to our hair? It becomes coarser, we get more of it, okay? Often when we shave, it goes from being long to short, so that short, stubbly hair is a lot pricklier, so it seems thicker, okay? But in reality, if we test and look at people who shave every day versus those who don't shave, and then we have them shave at the same time, there's no difference, right? All right. How long should you wait to swim after eating to be safe? 0. All right, you're on to me. My last tricks, my last one. What has a better impact on health, Justin Bieber or Facebook? You're going to say, what the heck does this have to do with anything? Well, I've got proof that Justin Bieber is in fact healthier because when he was born, cholesterol levels nationally went down, and then once Facebook was invented, they went up. So there's your absolute proof, right? So if anyone's taken a stats course, what's the thing you hear all the time, over and over and over again? Correlation does not equal causation. And so if you throw enough things together in a pot and try and pull them out, yeah, of course some things are going to correlate, just by coincidence, okay? But again, we see this constantly in the media or whatever. There's a book called How to Lie with Statistics, and on the front has a graph. And basically what they did with this graph is you cut the graph and take only a little small subsection of it, and it looks like this huge effect when it's really not. I think so. Maybe the modern equivalent is to say, well, religion causes war, and that's a maximum we hear in society. We hear atheists levy it all the time against Christianity and other religions. Well, in actuality, the Encyclopedia of Wars has looked at every war in the past 10,000 years, says actually only 7% of wars are caused by religion. But what's most prevalent in our mind? 9/11, right? Or other similar holy wars that are going on, or ones that have religious connotation. So bringing this all together, what's the point? Why come up here and play these mind tricks and play these games with you? And how does this relate to apologetics? What's your guess? To get a good laugh, yes. I am a jokester. I enjoy jokes. That's part of it. It's probably a little different than any apologetics talk you've heard before. And so I like to change things up a little. Any other thoughts?
Yes, make us more aware of our own thoughts and our own words and how they affect us.
Yeah, and that's great because as we become more aware of the self and how the mind works, it really helps us to grow closer to God. It also helps us be more effective evangelists. It helps us to be better parents, better friends, and again, in an apologetics talk, to know the truth better so that we sometimes recognize the truth is not always easy. We like to think sometimes, maybe not consciously, that it's easy to know what is true, but that's not always the case. Sometimes it takes work. And so our original perception of what is true, whether it's politics or religion or whatever else we might be talking about, we have these perceptions, right, and we think it's true, and so we just take them and automatically assume they're true, but it's not always the case. We have to rely on science and philosophy and reason and historical evidence sometimes, which takes work. And we shouldn't be ashamed of that. There's no shame in saying, yeah, I don't know, but I can find the answer. I think that was a great story that Manly told about not being able to have an answer and coming back to do it. And there's no shame in that, there's no problem, because in reality, that's how all of us think, that's how our minds work. It's just unfortunate that some people are so set in their ways that they're not willing to reevaluate that. And they'll go to great lengths to justify their view, even if they're caught in not a lie, but maybe a contradiction or some sort of self-defeating view. And that's why I think it's really important that we talk about this, we apply it to how we study, what we study, and how we talk to other people, because our words matter, our actions matter, and ultimately, what matters is Jesus. And so we want to support that. We want to be good stewards of what He's given us, and good ambassadors. And when we read through the Gospels, Jesus died, He's crucified, He was raised from the dead, He came back. What was the last thing He told His disciples before He ascended into heaven? Go and tell, go make disciples of all nations. And why would He want us to do that? Well, He loves us. And that's the good news, is that we are saved. We have salvation through Him, through grace. Sometimes people don't want to get there. There's hurdles, there's barriers in their way. Apologetics in whatever form can sometimes help them get over that barrier. But that's ultimately our goal, is to help them get over whatever barriers they might have so that they can see the gospel. Thank you.